What if I told you that a warrior's greatest enemy on the plains was not enemy arrows, but the icy wind? Imagine a vast white desert where temperatures drop to minus 50 degrees Celsius and there is nowhere to take shelter. In such conditions, a modern person wearing high-tech clothing would die in a matter of hours without a source of heat. But the indigenous peoples of North America lived in this icy hell for centuries, without central heating or synthetic materials. Their survival depended not on fighting nature, but on a deep understanding of its deadly laws and the ability to become part of the winter landscape. They turned the snow itself into a blanket and the frozen ground into a reliable fortress that saved them from certain death. Watch the video to the end to find out how an ordinary earthen pit could save the lives of an entire squad and why sleeping alone was tantamount to a death sentence. Are you ready to learn the truth that cold is defeated not by clothing, but by the mind? For a warrior of the Lakota or Cheyenne tribe, winter did not begin with the first snow, but with an inner mindset. They perceived the cold not as an enemy to be defeated, but as an element with which they had to coexist in harmony. Panic and fear caused the heart to beat faster, accelerating metabolism and leading to a rapid loss of precious heat. Therefore, the first rule of survival was absolute calm and control over one's breathing and thoughts. Warriors learned to slow down their movements so as not to waste extra energy and cause sweating, which becomes deadly in the cold. Moisture on the body cools instantly, turning clothing into an icy shell that sucks the life out of the body. Every action was measured, smooth, and devoid of fuss, as if the person had fallen into a kind of suspended animation. This state allowed the body to conserve its resources during long hours of immobility, while lying in wait or on the move. The ability to endure discomfort was cultivated from an early age and was considered the highest virtue of a man. Psychological resilience was reinforced by a deep understanding of the capabilities of one's body and the limits of its endurance. People knew that shivering was the body's last warning sign before freezing, and they prevented this state through sheer willpower. They used mental practices, imagining a hot source of fire inside themselves that warmed their limbs from within. This visualization helped maintain blood circulation even in the most remote parts of the body, preventing frostbite. Focusing on internal warmth allowed them to ignore external stimuli and maintain clarity of mind. Loneliness in a blizzard was the most terrible ordeal, so morale was maintained through a sense of unity with the tribe. Even when on solo patrol, a warrior felt an invisible connection with his kinsmen, which gave him strength. Despair killed faster than frost, so maintaining morale was a critical task. The belief that he had a duty to return and protect his people forced his body to work to its limits. It was a philosophy of survival, where spirit prevailed over matter and physical sensations. Interestingly, Europeans who found themselves in similar conditions often perished precisely because of their psychological rejection of the cold and their constant struggle against it. The Indians, on the other hand, did not waste their energy on complaints or attempts to change the inevitable, but simply adapted to reality. They observed natural cycles and knew that any storm would end sooner or later. This patience, developed over centuries of life on the Great Plains, was their main secret weapon. The ability to wait motionless in the snow for hours made them invisible and invulnerable to an unprepared enemy. This attitude toward the cold shaped a special type of character, steadfast and imperturbable in the face of any hardship. The cold was perceived as a strict teacher who punished mistakes and carelessness, but rewarded wisdom. This philosophy permeated the entire culture, from everyday life to military campaigns and rituals. Even in peacetime, people tried not to pamper themselves with excessive comfort so as not to lose this important connection with nature. Living on the brink of survival made every warm moment truly precious and meaningful. Many researchers have noted that indigenous people could sleep on the snow, covered with only one blanket, and wake up feeling refreshed. It seemed like a miracle, but in fact it was the result of years of training and the right mindset. The secret lay in the ability to relax the muscles, allowing blood to circulate freely throughout the body. Muscle tension from the cold, on the contrary, constricted the blood vessels, and accelerated the freezing of the limbs. Thus, relaxation became a paradoxical but only correct way to stay warm. This mental armor was stronger than any fur cloak because it was always with him. No wind could tear away or pierce this inner confidence in his abilities. It is this aspect that is often overlooked when studying the history of survival, although it is fundamental. Technology and clothing are important, but without the right mindset, they become useless pieces of fabric. The mind controlled the body, forcing it to generate heat where it seemed impossible. It is difficult for modern people to imagine such a degree of self-control and power over their own physiology. We are accustomed to relying on external sources of warmth and comfort, forgetting about the hidden resources of the body. The history of survival of the Great Plains tribes reminds us of the forgotten potential of the human body and spirit. It is a lesson in how accepting circumstances can be the key to overcoming them. I would be very interested to hear your point of view. What do you think about the role of psychology in survival? Write about it in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any new stories. Want to know a secret that will change your life and your perception of clothing? In the harsh conditions of the Great Plains and northern continents, the right clothing determined not just comfort, but survival itself. The main principle of heat retention used by Native Americans was layering, which created air pockets that acted as a natural thermos. The air trapped between layers of clothing is the best insulator, keeping body heat inside the cocoon, even when the wind is howling or snow is falling. Native Americans intuitively understood the laws of thermodynamics long before scientists described them, and turned generations of experience into a perfect system of protection from the cold. They never wore one thick garment because they knew that such clothing would freeze faster and be almost impossible to dry. Instead, they used several thin, lightweight layers that worked in harmony. The bottom layer of clothing was usually made of the softest and thinnest tanned leather, which fit snugly against the body, did not cause irritation, and did not rub during long journeys. This layer served to wick away moisture, keeping the skin dry even during strenuous physical activity. Shirts and leggings made of thicker suede were worn on top, creating a basic protective layer that was resistant to cold and wind. It was important that the clothing did not restrict movement, as impaired blood circulation led to rapid cooling of the extremities. The loose fit allowed warm air to circulate around the body, evenly warming all areas. This combination made the clothing both lightweight and extremely effective. Particular attention was paid to protecting the feet, as they lose a huge amount of heat when in contact with frozen ground. Moccasins were specially made slightly larger so that insulating material could be placed inside to create an additional soft layer. Dry grass, moss, fluffy reeds, or even soft bison wool were used as insulation, creating a cushioning pad under the foot. This natural insole not only kept the feet warm, but also absorbed excess moisture, leaving them dry even after a long journey. In severe frosts, 2 pairs of moccasins were worn, one on top of the other, with an additional layer of insulation between them. This combination worked better than any modern rubber sole. Heavy cloaks made of bison skins, which have long been a symbol of natural engineering, served as outerwear. Bison wool has unique properties. It is thick, curly, saturated with air, and retains heat well, thanks to the complex structure of the hair. In winter, these capes were worn with the fur on the inside to create a warm barrier directly against the body, while the leather surface on the outside protected against the piercing, steppe wind and wet snow. In the open plains where there are no trees or shelters, such a cape was a real spacesuit, preventing the body from getting cold. It could weigh several kilograms, but its effectiveness made this weight unnoticeable. It was real armor against the cold. A neck scarf or high fur collar acted as a valve regulating the heat exchange of the entire body, like a thermostat in a modern home. If it got too hot, the collar could be loosened, releasing excess steam and preventing perspiration. In frosty weather, it was tightened tightly, sealing the thermal contour around the neck and head, which prevented rapid cooling. The head was protected by hoods or hats made of otter, beaver, or coyote fur, which did not ice up from breathing and retain their shape even in strong winds. The face was often covered with the edge of the cloak, leaving only a narrow slit for the eyes as modern northern hunters do. This method of protection was extremely effective. Belts and straps were used not only to support clothing, but also to regulate thermal insulation, as they allowed the volume of air chambers between layers to be controlled. By strapping on a cape, a warrior created a closed air chamber around the torso, where the most valuable heat was retained. If necessary, the belt could be tightened or loosened, instantly changing the effectiveness of the insulation. The cuffs on the sleeves were also tightly tied or fastened with leather straps to prevent the wind from blowing inside. Every detail of the costume was thought out to the smallest detail and tested by centuries of harsh practice. Nothing superfluous, only what really protects from the cold. Interestingly, clothing was often decorated with fringe not only for beauty, but also for a practical purpose that many people today are unaware of. The fringe helped to quickly drain water during rain or snowmelt, preventing the clothing from getting soaked through and keeping it light. Water ran down the thin leather strips, bypassing the main body of the fabric and not lingering on the surface. In addition, a small piece of fringe could always be torn off and used as a spare rope or thread for repairs on the road. It was an example of the perfect combination of aesthetics and functionality in the culture of nomadic peoples. Such clothing was both beautiful and absolutely practical. The women of the tribe spent months tanning hides, tanning leather, and sewing winter gear for the whole family, using skills passed down through the female line. Well-made winter clothes were valued more than any weapon or jewelry because the life of the wearer depended on them. The skill of the seamstress determined whether the hunter would return home after a winter blizzard or freeze to death somewhere in the steppe. The seams were coated with fat or wax to make them waterproof, making the clothing virtually airtight. Such equipment lasted for years, sometimes decades, and could be passed down if it was in good condition. It was a real investment in the family's future. This cabbage principle allowed for a flexible response to changes in weather and physical activity, like a natural thermostat. During brisk walking or running, the outer layers were removed to prevent sweating and wetting the inner layers of clothing. During breaks, they were immediately put back on to retain the accumulated heat and prevent the body from cooling down. Constant control of thermoregulation was the basis of life in a harsh climate and required attentiveness and discipline. This principle proved so effective that it is still used in modern mountaineering. Do you think modern synthetic jackets could compete with bison skins in those conditions? In the next chapter, you will learn how snow was transformed from a deadly enemy into a warm blanket. What if everything you've been taught is outdated and snow can actually keep you warm? Paradoxically, in the absence of forests and shelters, snow became the main building material for survival. Snow cover consists of many ice crystals, between which there is a huge amount of air. This air serves as an excellent heat insulator, preventing heat from escaping and cold from entering. Native Americans and subarctic peoples masterfully used this property to create temporary dwellings from literally nothing. The simplest and quickest shelter was a snow trench or pit dug into a deep snowdrift. A warrior would dig a hole large enough to fit inside while lying down or sitting, huddled together. The pit was covered with skins, skis, or branches if available. The snow walls provided reliable protection from the biting wind, which was the main cause of hypothermia. Inside such a cocoon, the temperature could be tens of degrees higher than outside. A more complex structure was the quinsy, a temporary dwelling typical of subarctic peoples, such as the Cree and Athabascans. To build it, they first raked up a large pile of snow, compacted it, and allowed it to harden in the cold. Then they carefully dug out the inside of the pile, creating a dome-shaped space. The walls were made of a certain thickness, so that they would not collapse but would allow a little air to pass through. The entrance was made below floor level so that warm air rising upwards would not escape outside. The entrance was always closed with a block of snow or a thick skin, creating an airtight vestibule. Inside such a snow house, the heat from one or two bodies quickly raised the temperature to above zero. The walls melted slightly, forming an icy crust that further strengthened the structure and reflected heat. It was a surprisingly cozy and quiet refuge in the middle of a raging blizzard. Outside, the storm could howl, but inside there was complete silence due to the sound-absorbing properties of snow. In the Great Plains, where snow was often blown away by the wind, the technique of snow walls was used. Warriors built semicircular barriers out of dense snowdrifts, placing them against the wind. Behind such a wall, a wind shadow zone was formed where a small fire could be lit. Reflecting off the white wall, the heat from the fire returned to the people, creating a thermal shield effect. This allowed them to survive even in completely open terrain without natural shelter. Sometimes in the most extreme situations, the method of completely burying oneself in the snow without building a dome was used. A person would wrap themselves in a bison's skin with their head and allow the snow to cover them from above. The layer of snow acted as an extra blanket, insulating the person from the outside environment. The main thing was to move periodically so that the snow would not compress into an icy shell. It was also necessary to leave a small hole for breathing so as not to suffocate. Such methods required tremendous psychological endurance, as the person had to lie motionless in a confined space. The fear of being buried alive had to give way to a rational understanding of the physics of the process. The heat of one's own body, reflected from the skin and retained by the snow, created a microclimate suitable for life. In the morning, the warrior simply got up, shaking off the snow cover like a bear after hibernation. It was a union with nature in its harshest form. The only danger was the melting snow coming into contact with the warm body and soaking the clothes. Therefore, the outer layer of clothing had to be water repellent and well greased. If the clothes got wet, the snow den turned from a refuge into an icy trap. The skill lay in balancing heat retention with preventing overheating. Experienced warriors sensed this line intuitively. Surprisingly, it was these techniques that often saved entire detachments caught off guard by a sudden blizzard. With no time to set up a teepee, they simply disappeared under the snow, waiting out the storm. Enemies could pass a meter away from them without noticing the snow-covered mounds. Snow became not only a shelter, but also the perfect camouflage. Thus, nature itself hid those who knew how to use its gifts. This knowledge was passed down from generation to generation as the highest wisdom of survival. It taught that there are no absolutely bad things in the world, only the inability to use them. Even cold and dead snow could give life if you knew how to handle it. Don't forget to like this if you were surprised by the engineering ingenuity of ancient peoples. Are you ready for the shocking truth about how people kept each other warm? When temperatures dropped to critical levels, individualism became an unaffordable luxury that led to death. The Plains Indians understood perfectly well that the human body is a powerful heat generator, with an output of about 100 watts. If you combine several such generators in a confined space, you can survive any night. Group sleeping was not just a tradition, but a strictly practiced survival technique. The warriors lay down to sleep in a tight group, pressing their backs or sides against each other. This arrangement minimized the surface area through which heat escaped and created a single thermal core. It was always significantly warmer in the center of the group than at the edges, so places were not assigned randomly. The youngest, wounded, or less resilient members of the unit were usually placed in the middle. Strong and experienced warriors lay down at the edges, taking the brunt of the cold. There was a rotation system in which people changed places during the night. Those who froze on the edge moved to the center to warm up and regain their strength. Those who warmed up in the center moved to the periphery, giving their warmth to the outside world. This process often took place without words, by mutual agreement and understanding of the situation. It was a living, pulsating machine working for the collective good. They covered themselves with large shared skins, creating a single covering for the entire group. Warm air from the breath and bodies of many people accumulated under this huge blanket. The skins at the edges were tucked under the bodies of those sleeping on the outside to prevent the cold wind from blowing in. The result was a kind of human pile covered by an airtight dome of fur. The temperature inside could be quite comfortable, even in severe frost outside. An important point was the position of the heads and feet during sleep. They often slept in a jack or star position, with their feet toward the center, where they could be covered additionally. Feet freeze the fastest, so keeping them warm was a priority for the whole group. The intertwining of bodies created a complex structure where everyone warmed their neighbor. This required complete trust and an absence of disgust or personal boundaries. In the culture of the Iroquois, who lived in longhouses, the principle was similar, but it was implemented on bunks. People slept in families, huddled close together under shared fur blankets. The warmth of the hearth was complemented by the warmth of their bodies, creating a cozy atmosphere. Children and the elderly were always in the warmest place, protected by adults. This strengthened social bonds and a sense of responsibility for one another. Group sleeping also provided security, as someone could always stay awake or sleep lightly. Any change in a neighbor's condition, such as severe shivering, was immediately noticed by the others. The freezing person was immediately rubbed and warmed, preventing them from falling into a dangerous sleep. The group became a single organism with a common circulatory system. Mutual assistance was an automatic reaction that did not require orders. Interestingly, a similar practice existed among European soldiers, but it was often perceived as a violation of discipline. For the Indians, however, it was part of their military strategy and everyday culture. They saw nothing wrong with seeking warmth from a comrade. The survival of the tribe always took precedence over personal comfort or prejudice. In a blizzard, everyone was equal in the face of death. This method saved resources as it did not require lighting a large number of fires. Fuel was scarce on the plains and had to be conserved for cooking. Body heat was a free and renewable resource that was always available. The effectiveness of this bioheating has been proven by centuries of successful survival. Modern tourists and climbers still use this principle in extreme situations. The penguin effect works flawlessly, saving lives where technology fails. Human warmth remains the most reliable heater on the planet. Could you sleep in such cramped conditions to save your life? In the next chapter, you will learn what warriors ate to keep their internal fire burning. In extreme cold, the human body turns into a furnace that requires a huge amount of high-calorie fuel. Ordinary food could not provide the energy needed to maintain body temperature in the cold. The Native Americans of the Great Plains developed the perfect food for winter expeditions: pemmican. It was a mixture of dried and powdered bison meat mixed with large amounts of melted fat. Sometimes dried berries were added to the mixture for flavor and vitamins. Pemmican was incredibly nutritious and compact, did not spoil for years, and did not require cooking. A small piece of this product gave a feeling of fullness and a boost of energy for several hours of hard travel. The fat that formed the basis of pemmican was slowly absorbed, providing long-lasting and even heat release. It was a strategic fuel that allowed the body to function as a heater. Warriors carried it in leather pouches, always having a supply of food at hand. Special attention was paid to eating hot food whenever possible. Hot broth made from meat and bones instantly warmed the body from the inside, stimulating blood circulation. Liquid food was absorbed more quickly and helped combat dehydration, which can occur unnoticed in the cold. Even simple hot water with herbs could restore strength to a frozen person. But it was not always possible to build a fire, so dry rations were the mainstay. It was strictly forbidden to eat snow in its pure form, as this led to a sharp cooling of the body. Melting snow in the mouth required a huge amount of energy, which was already in short supply. In addition, ice-cold water could cause throat inflammation and damage tooth enamel. Snow was melted in containers on the body or over a tiny fire, turning it into water. Drinking habits were strictly observed, as blood thickened by the cold did not warm the limbs well. Fatty foods were a priority, and warriors specifically sought out the fattest pieces of prey. The internal fat of animals was considered a delicacy and the best remedy for the cold. It coated the stomach and provided a powerful influx of calories needed to combat the frost. Lean pieces of meat were saved for the warm season or for drying. Instinct told people that fat was the key to survival. The diet also included certain roots and herbs that stimulated blood circulation. Some plants had a warming effect, such as ginger or pepper. They were chewed on the go or brewed as tea to invigorate and ward off drowsiness. Knowledge of the properties of plants helped maintain the body's tone in difficult conditions. Nature provided not only cold, but also the means to combat it. The diet was subordinated to the rhythm of the detachment's movement and stops. The main meal was usually in the evening, before bedtime, so that the body would have energy to keep warm at night. In the morning, they ate less so as not to waste energy on digestion during active movement. They snacked on pemmican on the go, without stopping. This allowed them to maintain a constant blood sugar level and body temperature. The metabolism of people who lived in the cold all the time switched to a more intense mode. Their bodies learned to extract energy from food more efficiently and convert it into heat. This was a physiological adaptation developed over generations of living in a harsh climate. Europeans were often surprised at how little food Native Americans needed to perform hard work. The secret was in the quality and energy density of their diet. Pemmican became the prototype for modern energy bars and dry rations for special forces. Its recipe was borrowed by polar explorers and travelers around the world. A simple but ingenious formula. Protein plus fat became the formula for survival. Without this superfood, the exploration of the Northern Territories would have been impossible. The history of food here is inextricably linked to the history of survival. Thus, a warrior's stomach was his furnace, and fat was the coal that kept life burning. The ability to obtain, preserve, and properly distribute food was an essential military skill. A hungry warrior was a dead warrior, so food security was a top priority. Eating was not a pleasure, but a harsh necessity and part of tactics. What if I showed you a time machine that would take us back to an era where every hill was a fortress? The ability to read the landscape and use its features was the second most important skill after the ability to dress. The plain only appears flat. In reality, it is cut by ravines, riverbeds, and folds in the terrain. During a blizzard, open spaces became wind tunnels where the wind knocked people off their feet. Salvation lay below ground level, in natural depressions. Ravines and gullies served as natural windbreaks, where the wind speed dropped significantly. Warriors sought out deep hollows overgrown with bushes, which trapped snow and dampened gusts of wind. Descending to the bottom of the ravine, it was possible to find relative calm and catch one's breath. However, one had to be careful not to be buried by the snow that had been swept in from above. Choosing the right place required experience and knowledge of local aerodynamics. The beds of frozen rivers with their high, steep banks provided excellent protection. A dead zone always formed under the steep bank, where the wind did not blow. Here it was possible to dig burrows or simply huddle against the earthen wall. Unlike the air, the earth retained some heat and served as a heat accumulator. The riverbanks also provided protection from enemy observation, concealing the camp. Thick bushes or undergrowth in river floodplains were used to create temporary shelters. Branches were woven together to create a frame, which was then covered with snow or skins. Inside such thickets, the wind lost its strength, breaking against thousands of branches. In addition, the shrubs provided fuel for small fires necessary for survival. These were oases of life in the icy desert. Sometimes rock outcrops or piles of stones were used. Stones heated during the day, even by the meager winter sun, could give off heat at night. Hiding on the leeward side of a boulder, a person received reliable protection for their back. Stone niches and caves were ideal shelters, but they were rare on the plains. Such places were often contested not only by people, but also by predators. If the terrain was completely flat, warriors could use their horses as a living shield. The horses were laid on the ground in a circle or semicircle, and people lay down inside this living fence. The animals' bodies protected them from the wind and provided additional warmth. This was risky for the horses, but in a critical situation, human life was more important. Such a living fort could save a detachment in the middle of the bare steppe. In subarctic regions, they used tree stumps, the huge roots of fallen trunks. Under such a root, a ready-made pit was formed, protected by a wall of earth and intertwined roots. It was enough to deepen it a little and cover it with branches to get a cozy dwelling. The forest itself provided shelter for those who knew how to see it. These natural shelters did not require tools to build. Knowledge of the wind rose allowed them to predict where snowdrifts would form and where the ground would remain bare. An experienced tracker could determine the direction of the wind from the shape of the snowdrifts and find a safe path. They read the snowy book of the plains like a map, seeing safe areas where a novice saw only a white field. It was the art of navigation and survival in one bottle. Using the terrain allowed them not only to hide from the weather, but also to remain unnoticed. Hidden in the folds of the terrain, camps were invisible even from a short distance. This was critically important in the context of constant intertribal wars. Safety from the elements should not come at the expense of military security. Nature created shelters, and humans simply learned to find and refine them. This interaction with the landscape was much more effective than attempts to build complex structures. Flexibility and adaptability were the main principles of survival architecture. What would you do if you found yourself in an open field in a blizzard? In the next chapter, we will discuss technologies that help people stay warm without fire. Controlling fire in winter conditions was a delicate art bordering on magic. A large campfire was a luxury that scouts or hunters behind enemy lines could rarely afford. Fire was visible for many miles, and smoke gave away their presence even sooner. Therefore, Native Americans developed methods of generating heat with a minimum amount of flame and smoke. They used fuel that gave off a lot of heat but little light. The main fuel on the treeless plains was dry bison dung, or kisyak. It burned slowly, evenly, with almost no flame, and most importantly, almost no smoke. The smell from such a fire was natural for the steppe and did not arouse suspicion. The heat from smoldering kisyak was enough to boil water or warm hands. It was easy to carry, lightweight, and always available. Heated stones were used to warm the sleeping area. The stones were heated in a fire, then wrapped in pieces of leather or grass and placed under the blanket at the feet. Such a stone heat accumulator could provide warmth throughout the night, slowly releasing energy. It was a safe way to keep warm, eliminating the risk of fire while sleeping. The stones were carefully selected, avoiding those that could crack from the heat. The Dakota fire technique involved digging a pit with an air duct for hidden combustion. The fire was lit at the bottom of the pit, and the smoke dissipated through a system of small holes in the ground. From the outside, there were no visible flames or smoke. The heat from such a fire rose in a narrow beam, which could be used to cook food. The ground around the pit also warmed up, creating a warm area for sitting. The teepees used special screens and inner lining to create a draft that pulled the smoke straight up. This allowed a fire to be lit inside the dwelling without the risk of suffocation. Warm air circulated between the lining and the outer covering, creating an insulating layer. Even a small fire in the center could maintain a positive temperature in a large teepee. The nomads' engineering was focused on maximum efficiency. To quickly light a fire in wet weather, they always carried tinder in a waterproof bag. This could be dry rot, plant fluff, or specially prepared tinder fungus. The ability to light a fire with a single spark with numb hands was a vital skill. Fire was treated like a living thing, sometimes carrying coals in a special horn or pot when moving. Losing the fire could be a fatal mistake. In the eastern forests, where the Iroquois, Haudenosaunee, lived, the approach to winter housing was monumental. Their famous longhouses were true communal dwellings designed to accommodate several families of the same clan. The frame of tree trunks was covered with thick layers of elm bark, which served as an excellent insulator. In winter, the walls were additionally insulated with a layer of moss and snow on the outside. Inside the longhouse, there was a special microclimate. Along the central passageway, there was a row of hearths, each serving two families living opposite each other. The smoke escaped through holes in the roof, which were regulated by pieces of bark depending on the wind. The heat from the many fires in people's bodies accumulated inside the huge room. The sleeping bunks were located on a raised platform where the warm air rose. The space under the bunks was used to store firewood, which was also dried there before use. Dry firewood produced more heat and less smoke, which was important in a closed room. Life in a longhouse was a collective struggle against the cold, where everyone contributed. Children gathered brushwood, women tended the hearths, and men chopped large logs. The entrances to the longhouse at the ends were protected by vestibules made of skins to prevent cold air from entering. The ventilation system was designed to provide fresh air without drafts. The architecture of the Iroquois was perfectly adapted to the harsh winters of the Northeast. These were not temporary huts, but permanent structures that served for decades. The social structure of the clan was strengthened by the shared experience of wintering under one roof. Long winter evenings were a time for telling legends and passing on knowledge to the young. The warmth of the hearth brought people together, creating a sense of security and belonging. The longhouse was not just a dwelling, but a symbol of the unity and strength of the Haudenosaunee people. Physical preparation for the cold began long before winter and was part of education. The Indians believed that the body could and should be accustomed to low temperatures, just as metal is hardened in fire. Morning baths in ice-cold water were the norm for men of many tribes, even in freezing temperatures. This was not an act of masochism, but a way to train the blood vessels and strengthen the spirit. After bathing, the body was vigorously rubbed with skins or snow until it turned red. Such procedures triggered a powerful release of adrenaline and activated the immune system. The body learned to react instantly to the cold, activating internal heat generation mechanisms. The skin became less sensitive to frost, and the pain threshold increased. Warriors who had undergone such training could feel comfortable in light clothing, where Europeans would freeze in fur coats. From an early age, children were taught to run barefoot in the snow for short distances. This strengthened their feet and taught them not to be afraid of contact with cold surfaces. Outdoor games continued in all weather conditions, forming a habit of treating the cold as a natural environment. Complaints about the cold were considered a sign of weakness and were not encouraged. Endurance was the main criterion for growing up. Special ointments based on bear or beaver fat mixed with herbs were also used. They were rubbed on exposed areas of the body, the face and hands, before going out into the cold. The fat created a protective film, preventing chapping and frostbite. It was a kind of natural cosmetics for extreme conditions. The smell of fat was a familiar aroma in winter camps. Hardening affected not only the body, but also sleep and eating habits. The ability to sleep in fits and starts, eat cold food, and endure hardship was part of a warrior's training. A person who depended on comfort was considered vulnerable and unreliable. In a culture where survival depended on personal qualities, hardening was an investment in the future. This made Native Americans some of the most adaptable people on Earth. The ability to foresee the approach of a blizzard was not mysticism, but the result of observation. Native Americans read the signs of nature that warned of danger many hours in advance. Changes in animal behavior were the first and most reliable indicator. If bison began to huddle together or migrate to lower ground, it meant a storm was coming. Birds falling silent before a storm also signaled the need to prepare. The sky was an open book for those who knew how to look. The appearance of a halo around the sun or moon, parhelia or sundogs, indicated the presence of ice crystals in the upper layers of the atmosphere. This was a sure sign of imminent cooling and a change in the weather. The color of the sunset, the shape of the clouds, and the direction of the wind completed the picture. A sudden change in the wind often preceded the arrival of a cold front. Sounds traveled differently in frosty air, and hunters noticed these changes. A particular ringing or, conversely, muffled sounds could herald snowfall. The smell of the air also changed before a storm, becoming sharper and fresher. The senses of people living in nature were heightened to the limit. They could physically feel changes in atmospheric pressure. Preparations for a blizzard began immediately after the first signs appeared. Homes were reinforced, firewood was gathered, and food supplies were checked. Horses were driven to sheltered places closer to the camp. No one hoped for luck, as the price of a mistake was too high. The speed of reaction often determined who would survive the night. The elders, the keepers of knowledge, passed on their experience of weather forecasting to the young. There were many signs associated with the local features of the landscape. Knowledge of their territory allowed them to understand where trouble usually came from. It was an early warning system that worked without satellites or radar. Nature itself warned its children. One only had to know how to listen. We have seen that the survival of indigenous peoples in winter conditions was not accidental, but the result of a complex system of knowledge and skills. Snow walls, group sleeping, a special diet, and psychological hardening were all elements of a unified strategy. They did not fight nature, but used its laws to their advantage, turning obstacles into tools. Their experience proves that human adaptability is virtually limitless. The history of these tribes is a textbook of courage and ingenuity written in the snow of the Great Plains. They showed that warmth can be found even in an icy desert if you look for it together. Their legacy lives on in modern survival techniques and reminds us of the power of the human spirit. Which of these survival techniques did you find most surprising or unexpected? Would you like to see a video about summer life and bison hunting? Write your suggestions in the comments and subscribe to the channel to rediscover history.